Alright, a very good afternoon, class. And for today, we are beginning a new chapter. That is the third chapter from your text Flamingo, titled Deep Water, written by William Douglas. Now, this story in itself is part and parcel of a larger writing piece written by William Douglas himself, an autobiography, if you must. He has written his own story, his own life story, his struggles about his life. And this is the part where he opens up about his fear of water and how he overcame that fear. All right. Now, in the beginning of the chapter itself, you'll see a paragraph which gives you information about the writer himself, that is William Douglas. So, he was born in Maine, Minnesota, and after graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in English and Economics, he spent 2 years teaching high school in Yakima. However, he got tired of this and decided to pursue a legal career. He met Franklin D. Roosevelt at Yale and became an advisor and friend to the president. Douglas was a leading advocate of individual rights. He retired in 1975 with a term lasting 36 years and remains longest serving justice in the history of the court. The following excerpt is taken from Of Men and Mountains by William O. Douglas. It reveals how, as a young boy, William Douglas nearly drowned in a swimming pool. In this essay, he talks about his fear of water and thereafter how he finally overcame it. Notice how the autobiographical part of the selection is used to support his discussion of fear. So, as you can see, he has had a very long and illustrious career, all right? He was the longest serving judge, he was an advisor to the president, he was a very well educated man, and in his autobiography, the part of which you are reading, all right, just a part. This is the part where he discusses how a fear of water was developed in him and how he overcame it. That is what we'll be learning in this short story. All right. So we start with the text Deep Water by William Douglas. It had happened when I was 10 or 11 years old. I had decided to learn to swim. There was a pool at the YMCA in Yakima that offered exactly the opportunity. The Yakima River was treacherous. Mother continually warned against it and kept fresh in my mind the details of each drowning in the river. But the YMCA pool was safe. It was only 2 or 3 feet deep at the shallow end, and while it was 9 feet deep at the other, the drop was gradual. I got a pair of wings and went to the pool. So, it was around 10 11 years old when our author, William Douglas, decided that he wanted to learn how to swim, all right? Now, the Yakima River was a very treacherous river. There had been many drownings in it, and his mother had warned him against it, sorry. But as compared to the river, the YMCA pool was safe. It was just 3 feet at the shallow end, all right? So there was no way that he could drown in a 3 feet pool. And it gradually went up to 9 feet at the deep end. So, as long as he kept to the shallow end, there was no way he could drown. And so he got himself a pair of water wings, all right? Those are supports, inflatable supports, जुन चाहिँ उनीहरूले हातमा लगाएर ट्युब जस्तो हुन्छ, so that it prevents it from drowning. So he had all the safety equipments and he was learning how to swim in the safety of a shallow end of the pool. I hated to walk naked into it and show my skinny legs, but I subdued my pride and did it. So he had very skinny legs and he felt a bit ashamed of it. But then his desire to learn how to swim was more than the fear of showing off his skinny legs. And so he just went to learn how to swim. From the beginning, however, I had an aversion to the water when I was in it. This started when I was 3 or 4 years old, and father took me to the beach in California. He and I stood together in the surf. I hung on to him, yet the waves knocked me down and swept over me. I was buried in water. My breath was gone. I was frightened. Father laughed, but there was terror in my heart at the overpowering force of the waves. So, why he wanted to learn to swim in the first place is because he already had a fear of water and he wanted to overcome it. It was when he was just 3 years old or 4 years old, in between 3 and 4, he had gone with his father to a beach in California. His father wanted to surf and he had taken him along. And in that adventure, he had a misadventure. He almost drowned and he was overcome with fear at the fierce face of nature, the waves which almost swallowed him. His father laughed, all right, but then that episode had left a deep scar on his heart and on his mind. My introduction to the YMCA swimming pool revived unpleasant memories and stirred childish fears. But in a little while, I gathered confidence, I paddled with my new water wings, watching the other boys and trying to learn by aping them. I did this 2 or 3 times on different days and was just beginning to feel at ease in the water when the misadventure happened. So when he went to the pool, it revived some of the old fear, right, of drowning. But then he tried to gather up whatever little confidence he had and got into the pool. And slowly he was getting used to it, all right. He was looking at the other boys and aping them, meaning he was copying the other boys who were there swimming in the pool. And there had been 2 or 3 times when he had got in the pool, and so he was slowly getting used to it. But then the misadventure happened. What happened? We'll go on to see as we read further to the story. I went to the pool when no one else was there. The place was quiet, the water was still, and the tiled bottom was white and clean as a bathtub. I was timid about going in alone, so I sat on the side of the pool to wait for others. So one day when he reached the pool, there was nobody else in the pool. It was completely empty. The water was so still and so clear, you could see the bottom tiles of the swimming pool. And so he didn't want to get in alone. So he sat on the side, waiting for others to arrive. I had not been there long when in came a big bruiser of a boy, probably 18 years old. He had thick hair on his chest. It was a beautiful physical specimen with legs and arms that showed rippling muscles. He yelled, "Hi, Skinny, how do you like to be ducked?" With that, he picked me up and tossed me into the deep end. I landed in a sitting position, swallowed water, and went at once to the bottom. I was frightened, but not yet frightened out of my wits. On the way down, I planned, when my feet hit the bottom, I would make a big jump, come to the surface, lie flat on it, and paddle to the edge of the pool. So as he was waiting, another boy came up from behind him. He was almost like 18 years old, a very athletic looking boy with rippling muscles and chest hair. He did not know that Douglas did not know how to swim. He just came up to him jokingly and he said, "Hey, Skinny, how would you like to take a dive?" And then he pushed him inside the pool. And naturally, he straight away drowned because he does not know how to swim. He landed in the water in a sitting position and he started drowning immediately. And even though he was drowning, he was not at his wits' end, all right? He was already thinking of a plan. He thought to himself, as soon as I reach the bottom of the pool, I will kick with my legs and come up to the surface. When I reach the surface, I will lie flat. And then when I'm floating, I will paddle to the end of the pool. So that was his plan. It seemed a long way down. Those 9 feet were more like 90. And before I touched bottom, my lungs were ready to burst. But when my feet hit bottom, I summoned all my strength and made what I thought was a great spring upwards. I imagined I would bob to the surface like a cork. So even though the deep end of the pool was just 9 feet long, he thought that it is taking more than 90 feet, alright? He thought that it is more than 90 feet because it was taking a long time to reach the bottom. But as soon as he reached the bottom, he hadn't forgotten his plan. He summoned all his strength and kicked to come up to the surface. He thought that it was a very powerful push which he had performed, so much so that he would just bounce up to the surface of the water. Instead, I came up slowly. I opened my eyes and saw nothing but water. Water that had a dirty yellow tinge to it. I grew panicky. I reached up as if to grab a rope, and my hands clutched only at water. I was suffocating. I tried to yell, but no sound came out. Then my eyes and nose came out of the water, but not my mouth. So he thought that he would instantly come up to the surface, but that was not the case. He came up very slowly, and when he opened his eyes, he saw nothing but water all around him. And when he came up finally to the surface, he tried to reach up with his hands. All right, search to find a rope or anything he could hold on to, but there was none. Finally, when he reached the surface, only his eyes and nose came up. His mouth was still under the water, and he failed at his plan the first time around. I flailed at the surface of the water, swallowed and choked. I tried to bring my legs up, but they hung as dead weights, paralyzed and rigid. A great force was pulling me under. I screamed, but only the water heard me. I had started on the long journey back to the bottom of the pool. So he tried to come up to the surface. He tried to move his legs, but then he felt as if his legs were paralyzed. He could not even move them. He tried to shout, but as his mouth was already covered with water, he could not even shout. Only the water could hear him. And then again he started going down to the bottom of the pool. I struck at the water as I went down, expending my strength as one in a nightmare fights an irresistible force. I lost all my breath. My lungs ached. My head throbbed. I was getting dizzy, but I remembered the strategy. I would spring from the bottom of the pool and come up like a cork to the surface. I would lie flat on the water, strike out with my arms, and thrash with my legs. Then I would get to the edge of the pool and be safe. So he felt as if some irresistible force was pulling him down as he was going under. But then he still had not forgotten his plan. He was still sticking to it. As soon as I reach the bottom, I'll kick up with my legs. As I reach the surface, I will lie flat on the water and paddle to the edge of the pool and be safe. I went down endlessly. I opened my eyes. Nothing but water with a yellow glow. Dark water that no one could see through. But then the going down process was taking much longer than he had anticipated or expected. When he opened his eyes, he saw nothing but water. Water with a yellow glow, dark water, through which one could not see anything. And then sheer, stark terror seized me. Terror that knows no understanding. Terror that knows no control. Terror that no one can understand who has not experienced it. I was shrieking underwater. I was paralyzed underwater, stiff, rigid with fear. Even the screams in my throat were frozen. Only my heart and the pounding in my head said that I was still alive. When he was going down, suddenly his old terror came back, all right? The fear caught hold of him in a very strong manner. Fear and terror that had no control, that he could not control, that he could not understand, but only which can be experienced. He was shrieking underwater, right? He was paralyzed underwater. He could not move. The only thing that was telling him he was alive was his heartbeat and the pounding in his head. Those two things were telling him that he is still alive. Then, in the midst of the terror, came a touch of reason. I must remember to jump when I hit the bottom. At last, I felt the tiles under me. My toes reached out as if to grab them. I jumped with everything I had. And as he was lying there, afraid, terrified, paralyzed, there came a touch of reason. All right, he remembered once again what he had to do: reach the bottom, jump up, float at the surface, paddle to the end of the pool. So finally, when his feet were about to touch the tiles, he reached out with his toes. All right, आपने पूरा stretch करो so as to touch the tiles. But I jumped with everything I had. So again, Ulai ji ke lage that he's using all his strength, and he jumped. But the jump made no difference. The water was still around me. I looked for ropes, ladders, water wings. Nothing but water. A mass of yellow water held me. Stark terror took an even deeper hold on me, like a great charge of electricity. I shook and trembled with fright. My arms wouldn't move. My legs wouldn't move. I tried to call for help, to call for mother. Nothing happened. So what he thought was a great jump actually did nothing. Right? It made no difference. He could not even come to the surface. He tried looking for ropes, he tried looking for ladders, he tried looking for water wings, he tried reaching out in all directions, but there was nothing but water surrounding him. Now that terror came back even stronger and took a deeper hold of him. He shook and trembled with fright. His arms wouldn't move, his legs wouldn't move. He tried to call for help, but obviously he was underwater and couldn't. And then, strangely, there was light. I was coming out of the awful yellow water. At least my eyes were. My nose was almost out too. Then I started down a third time. I sucked for air and got water. The yellowish light was going out. And then, strangely, in all that terror, he saw light. He was coming out to the surface. All right. And his eyes came out this time, but not his nose and mouth. This time his nose was also underwater. Only his eyes came out. He could only see the surface. He tried to take in air, but it was all water because both his mouth and nose were underwater. Now he felt himself giving up. His body was giving up on him. He was slowly going unconscious. He was losing consciousness. Then all effort ceased. I relaxed. Even my legs felt limp, and a blackness swept over my brain. It wiped out fear. It wiped out terror. There was no more panic. It was quiet and peaceful. Nothing to be afraid of. This is nice. To be drowsy, to go to sleep. No need to jump. Too tired to jump. It's nice to be carried gently, to float along in space. Tender arms around me, tender arms like mother's. Now I must go to sleep. I crossed to oblivion, and the curtain of life fell. This time, when he was going down the third time, he was slowly losing consciousness, and his body had given up on him, and he felt his body go limp. And he was thinking to himself, there's no need to panic, there's no need to fear. Everything is slowly going quiet. Everything is so peaceful. There's no need to fight, no need to jump. Just go to sleep, is what his body was telling him to do now. Then he lost all consciousness, and the curtain of life fell. So our narrator, William Douglas, had drowned and lost consciousness. The next I remember, I was lying on my stomach beside the pool, vomiting. The chap that threw me in was saying, "But I was only fooling." Someone said, "That kid nearly died. Be all right now. Let's carry him to the locker room." Several hours later, I walked home. I was weak and trembling. I shook and cried when I lay on my bed. I couldn't eat that night. For days, a haunting fear was in my heart. The slightest exertion upset me, making me wobbly in the knees and sick to my stomach. So it appears he had been rescued, and the boy who had threw him inside the pool, he was saying that I did not know. All right, I was only joking. I did not know he was swimming. Then someone else said he nearly died, and that misadventure even deepened his fear of water. He already had a fear of water when he was 3 years old and almost drowned. And this drowning episode at the YMCA pool, the pool which he thought was safe, just 3 feet at the shallow end with water wings and all, that brought in more fear, right? It accelerated the fear that he already had in his mind. And after that, he went home. He cried. He couldn't eat that night. For days, he felt weak, exerted. All right, he felt wobbly in the knees and sick to the stomach. I never went back to the pool. I feared water. I avoided it whenever I could. So after this, he never went back to the YMCA pool as well. His fear was back and he avoided it whenever he could. A few years later, when I came to know the waters of the Cascades, I went to get into them. And whenever I did, whether I was wading the Teton, a bumping river, or bathing in a warm lake of the goat walks, the terror that had seized me in the pool would come back. It would take possession of me completely. My legs became paralyzed. Icy horror would grab my heart. So years after that, he couldn't get over the fear of the water. Whether he was just wading or taking a bath in the warm lake, as and when his body was surrounded by water, that terror came back to him and did not let him enjoy any leisures in life. This icy handicap stayed with me as the years rolled by. In canoes on main lakes, fishing for landlocked salmon, bass fishing in New Hampshire, trout fishing on the Dutchess and Metolius in Oregon, fishing for salmon on the Columbia, at Bumping Lake in the Cascades. Wherever I went, the haunting fear of the water followed me. It ruined my fishing trips, deprived me of the joy of canoeing, boating, and swimming. So it wasn't just swimming, all right? Even if he was canoeing, even if he was taking a boat ride, he was fishing, whatever activity he was engaged in, if it involved water in any way, shape, or form, he could not enjoy it at all. That fear would overtake him and render him useless, and he would not enjoy any activity. I used every way I knew to overcome this fear, but it held me firmly in its grip. So he tried everything, all right, but the fear never let go of him, and it has been multiple years. Finally, one October, I decided to get an instructor and learn to swim. I went to a pool and practiced 5 days a week, an hour each day. The instructor put a belt around me. A rope attached to the belt went through a pulley that ran on an overhead cable. He held on to the end of the rope and we went back and forth across the pool, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. On each trip across the pool, a bit of the panic seized me. Each time the instructor released his hold on the rope and I went under, some of the old terror returned and my leg froze. It was 3 months before the tension began to slack. Then he taught me to put my face under water and exhale, and to raise my nose and inhale. I repeated the exercise hundreds of times. Bit by bit, I shed part of the panic that seized me when my head went underwater. So finally, he decided that enough is enough. I will overcome this fear of water, and he got himself an instructor to learn how to swim. And for 5 days a week, every week, for 3 months, he practiced. And the instructor had a safety plan. All right, there was a belt tied around his waist. उसको कम्बरमा चाहिँ एउटा बेल्ट थियो, and the belt was tied to a rope or a pulley system, and that rope was held by the instructor. So there was no way he could drown. All right, the instructor was watching him every minute. The rope तान्ने बित्तिकै ऊ माथि आइहाल्थ्यो. So it was a foolproof plan. So he felt confident in that plan, and he started to learn how to swim. So he took lap every 5 days a week, 1 hour को लागि जहिले practice गर्थ्यो, and he went back and forth taking laps. All right, and there were times when the fear would seize him, especially when the instructor let go of the rope. Rope अलिकति लुज गर्ने बित्तिकै his body would freeze over. But then slowly and surely, after months had passed, that fear began to go away piece by piece, bit by bit. After that, the instructor taught him how to breathe out when the head is underwater and how to breathe in when the head comes above the water. Next, he held me at the side of the pool and had me kick with my legs. For weeks, I did just that. At first, my legs refused to work, but then gradually relaxed, and finally, I could command them. Thus, piece by piece, he built a swimmer, and when he had perfected each piece, he put them together into an integrated whole. In April, he said, "Now you can swim. Dive off and swim to the length of the pool. Crawl stroke." I did. The instructor was finished. So from October to April to the end of March, he learned how to swim piece by piece, bit by bit. The instructor gave him all the knowledge that was necessary to learn how to swim. But the fear that he had within himself, that fear, he had to take control over it. All right, he had to be the one to shed it. The instructor would not help him with that. So finally, in April, the instructor said, "Now you are a complete swimmer. Without any help, without any rope, without any water wings, you swim to the length of the pool and come back." And William Douglas did that, and the instructor was done. But he wasn't. But I was not finished. I still wondered if I would be terror stricken when I was alone in the pool. I tried it. I swam the length up and down. Tiny vestige of the old terror. Old terror would return. But now I could frown and say to that terror, "Trying to scare me, eh? Well, here's to you. Look." And off I would go for another length of the pool. So he thought that I must get rid of this fear once and for all. So he went alone to the pool to swim. And little tiny vestige of the fear would come back. But this time he was prepared. He had all the knowledge, all the know-how of how to swim, how to breathe, how to stay afloat. So he could turn to the fear and say, "Oh, trying to scare me, huh? Well, look at what I know now." So he would go off for another lap. This went on until July. But I was still not satisfied. So he did that for months, all right, without any help. He went alone to the pool. He swam again and again, and yet he was not satisfied. I was not sure that all the terror had left. He wanted to let go of that fear. He wanted to defeat that fear completely, and he was still not satisfied. So I went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, dive off a dock at Triggs Island, and swam 2 miles across the lake to Stampack Island. I swam the crawl, breaststroke, side stroke, backstroke. Only once did the terror return when I was in the middle of the lake. I put my face under and saw nothing but bottomless water. The old sensation returned in miniature. I laughed and said, "Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me?" It fled, and I swam on. Yet I had residual doubts. At my first opportunity, I hurried west, went up to the Teton to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek's trail to meet Glacier, and camped in the high meadow by the side of Warm Lake. The next morning I stripped, dived into the lake, and swam across to the other shore and back, just as Doc Corpon used to do. I shouted with joy, and Gilbert Peak returned the echo. I had conquered my fear of water. So he pushed himself, all right? He pushed himself to different situations to make sure that the fear of water does not return to him, that he has completely overtaken the fear, that he has destroyed the fear. So he went to Lake Wentworth in New Hampshire, he went to Triggs Island, he swam across to Lake Stamp Act, then he did the crawl stroke, the breaststroke, the side stroke, backstroke. There was only one time that the fear returned to him in miniature, right? When he was at the middle of a very vast lake. But then, even then, he was well prepared. He said, "Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me? It's not that I'm going to drown. I know all the know-how. I know all the basics. I have all the knowledge. So you cannot imbibe any fear in me." And that terror left. Then he still wasn't satisfied. He went to meet Glacier, Conrad Creek, and he swam across the Warm Lake. And that is when he was satisfied and decided that I have defeated my fear over water. The experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. In death, there is peace. There is terror only in the fear of death. As Roosevelt knew when he said, "All we have to fear is fear itself," because I had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror that fear of it can produce. The will to live somehow grew in intensity. At last I felt release, free to walk the trails and climb the peaks and to brush aside fear. So he says that the experience had a very deep meaning to him, all right, because he is talking about a fear, a terror which one cannot explain, which one cannot see, right? Which only one can feel. And if you have the tenacity for it, if you have the desire for it, if you have the willpower for it, you can overcome any fear. And he even quotes Roosevelt, the American president. He had once said, "All we have to fear is fear itself," right? That there's nothing to fear but fear. Once you overcome fear, there is nothing you can ever be afraid of. And that is how our narrator of the story, William Douglas, came over his fear of water in this third chapter titled Deep Water. Right? So that brings us to the end of the chapter. Have a good day.